I think that what people need to understand is that October 1954, important date, the top scientist at the Naval Research Labs in Washington, Rick Foch, good friend of mine, he was in the vault that had papers showing that we had mastered what is called gravity control. It's called electromagnetogravitics. Basically, it's a very advanced area of physics where you can cause the mass of an object, like this can, to go to zero, and you can float it anywhere. And if you take it a little further, it will disappear out of space-time, teleport to another point. So those technologies were really mastered by 1954, October. I'll give you the date. So we began to build clandestinely things that look a lot like an ET, extraterrestrial interstellar vehicle, but they're man-made. So some of the early ones we have in this book, what's called the ARV, Alien Reproduction Vehicle. And it was built, if you went into the interior of it, the witness was a guy who was in there and saw it at an air show at Norton Air Force Base in 1988. It was an antique. It had been around for about 30 years, since the late 50s. And in the interior, all the controls were from the Mercury capsule era of the late 50s, early 60s. So people, whenever they see these objects, will go, wow, I saw an alien. I said, wait, give me the details. So if there are seams, sections, rivets, parts, that's not interstellar. They're seamless. And how they're made, we don't probably have time for it. We know how they're made. But you're not digging up metal ore and smelting it and soldering it together. Yeah. Now, the man-made ones have become so sophisticated, as Jake Barber recently said, they're virtually indistinguishable from the ET ones. Because remember, this isn't 1958. This is 2025. Mm-hmm. So now visualize trillions of dollars of our money going into these projects, refining and refining and refining the tech.
It's reverse engineering and testing.
And better and better and better and better. But also, I will say this, kudos to the scientists I've met who work in those programs. Highest IQ people I've ever met are in these covert programs, usually not government, usually corporate. And although they're under contract, maybe with the agency, or they're under contract with some other entity. And I know who these guys are. They're on our list of people to be interrogated by law enforcement.
I was speaking in Roswell, New Mexico, Church on the Move, incredible pastor Troy there, and they do every year they do a 4th of July event.
Oh yeah,
that's like the light show. It's worth traveling there to go see. I think this year they're going to have like 200-something thousand drones do this light show. It's incredible. So I'll be speaking there again this year. But while I was there, I was like, I want to speak to someone, like some elderly person that was alive when this happened, and I want to know what the locals, because in the military, like, what do the locals say? So I sat down with this man, and he said what actually happened there was, it was a reverse engineering project. And by the way, if you're listening to this and you laugh, you're going to hell. They said that there was a hospital with Down syndrome people, like orphans, and they were taking these Down syndrome kids and putting them in this reverse engineering craft, and one of those crashed, and so it came out, and then they shut it down because they didn't want to get out. The government was putting Down syndrome kids and telling them they were astronauts and letting them fly some reverse engineered UFO, and that's what the locals in this area claim.
Look, it's a mixed picture. I dealt with some people before they died who were actually there when they retrieved.
Really?
Yeah. And so that's not quite accurate. And
did you laugh? They're laughing back there.
Yeah.
You
and
guys
so
are going to hell. Like,
yeah. But
sorry.
I will say they have many of these craft have people on board. Mm-hmm. And the ones that were early on being used to stage alien abductions and cattle mutilations, those did have usually small-statured men with certain deformities, and then they would make them look like an alien. Mm-hmm. We have an Air Force Office of Special Investigations man who worked those programs. He told us about that. And he knew that those were being used to stage this scary stuff. Because here, in order to have a war of that magnitude, where it's War of the Worlds, right? It's totally a hoax. You've got to brainwash the populace to be afraid of something, but you've also got to convince your world leaders eventually of a common alien threat. Their goal would be to unite the world, but not in a golden age of peace and prosperity, as I said, but to unite it in an endless cycle of conflict and war and fear through which they can seize power and, I will add, suspend our freedoms and liberties. That's their goal. And that goal, that purpose was concocted in the mid-50s. Eisenhower was not in favor of that. President Eisenhower, that's why they pushed him out. So about 1957 to 60, somewhere in there, the President of the United States was decapitated. Basically, you're no longer ahead of this. And that's when it all went sideways. So there has been no...
because then there's been no accountability, no control. They do what they want.
George H.W. Bush was part of the committee dealing with this, and Mr. Cheney. They were read in, but
there's probably
Clinton
there's probably a
wasn't.
conflict of interest there.
Yeah.
You get Cheney involved.
Well, he's been very involved since the 70s.
Right.
Yeah. So we know who's involved with these and operations. Admiral Bobby Ray Inman, very much involved since way back. He was the deputy director of CIA and head of the National Security Agency. He went on to the board of Science Applications International Corporation, SAIC.
These are all people involved in the military-industrial complexes
and
as well.
who are specifically are part of this operation. So the question becomes, what's the end game here? What we're trying to do, our mission statement.
Right.
Our mission statement is not to get a pound of flesh for all the horrific things that have happened in the last 70 years. Our purpose is to get this under proper control and oversight and move forward with a whole new golden era.
Because there's a lot of good things that could come from.
Oh my God.
I mean, you're talking
medical.
The last episode we did, at episode 24, we talked about 0-point energy and what that could bring to society and global peace and prosperity and health.
All kinds of things.
Yeah.
I mean, imagine whatever you drive. I used to have a Raptor. So, you have that thing running. You have 1,000 horsepower electromagnetic engine and alternator, and it never has to be plugged in. Where's the energy coming from? This quantum vacuum 0-point field, which was proven it was postulated in the 30s and proven in 1950s by Professor Casimir. So this is solid science and physics. Now, if you go to MIT or Harvard, they'll say, we don't have anything like that. Well, not that you know about in academia, right? But the people who work on these projects that are very covert, they have it. But see, this one of the things Patrick David said to me on his show a couple weeks ago was, you can't let those out because of the interest in oil, gas, coal. I said, no, wait. We've had 200 years of industrial revolution. But if I were to wiggle my nose like Bewitched and manifest one of those things right here, and we started mass manufacturing by the millions, it would take 15 years from right now.
There's a huge transition to power.
You're not talking about an app you download, right? You're talking about heavy industry.
Yeah.
So you have to retool. Let's take automobiles. There's 1.5 billion motor vehicles on the road. We make 100 million a year. If it all got retooled tomorrow, it'd be 15 years to change that industrial stock. Same thing for your house. Same for industry.
But the petro industry as a whole is worth $1,000 trillion, right? So that's the threat, right? If you introduce the technology that omits
and most of it offshore, right? Most of it offshore. So that's one of the big problems, is that you have to penetrate. People forget that Aramco and the Saudi royal family was pretty much set up after World War II by OSS and the CIA. Go look it up. So the energy sector is very much integrated into the secrecy around this. So that's the second big reason, is that we can let the IT technologies out so we can spy on everybody. By the way, when you say I agree to all these tech companies, you're giving them carte blanche and they're monitoring everything.
Sure.
And, I have a whistleblower right now who was on with the National Security Agency, who was in meetings with the senior C-suite people in a major tech company where that was all being set up. So, people are very naive about the fact that there's any real privacy there. But I think that the bigger agenda would be, how do we bring these other technologies out? Well, we bring them out once we have enough control over the populace. So that's the deep state I'm talking about. I'm not talking about just your political opponents who have done nasty things. I mean,
Right.
that's bad. And I decry it. You know, I say it's completely inappropriate to use institutions of the U.S. government for partisan political reasons or corrupt reasons. But this is the granddaddy. This is, no one's got their eye on this ball, Chad, and this is the one that's going to really come to haunt us if we don't get it under control fairly soon.